Shout out to our studio, our live streaming audience. Hello, everybody out there in Cyberland. We love you too. We hope you're enjoying the day, and we have some exciting things coming up. In just a few moments, we're going to have Mike Schultz talking about some of our feisty relatives of the past. You know, the whole ET thing and the revelation of what has happened on this planet. It's a very curious time as we are remembering, and we're taking the wool off of our eyes. There's some very heavy wool that has been put over our eyes, or that we have put over our own eyes. The evidence is all around in the pyramids and the hieroglyphs and the ancient Sumerian teachings and writings, and somehow we still, you know, as a culture, don't get it, that there have been people here from other places. And startling but true. Truth is indeed stranger than fiction, is it not? So I just want to invite everybody in the hallway and everybody who's standing up chatting to wrap up that conversation, to come back to the room and start finding your seats, start preparing your mind and your body for the next transmission in just a few minutes. In the meantime, does anyone have any questions, comments, things you wish to share about your experience here while we're setting up? You guys been having fun here today? What's the most potent thing you've learned so far from this experience or gleaned? Yeah, I got one or two words to describe something you're receiving. She's learning that she still has lots to learn, right? What's not to love about that? So yeah, and that's an interesting point. You know, there's lots to learn, and there's lots to know, and there's lots to remember. So as we attune and align ourselves with that highest divine mind, that highest divine self that we are, that contains all knowing and all things, and we intend to be conduits of great good love and benefit to all beings, then everything that we need to know will come to us as we ask. And it is in the asking that the information comes. In fact, a little story just about leading into what Mike's going to share today. My own guides. At one point, I was so frustrated about wanting to understand what was happening on this planet. I was like, would you please tell me what the is going on this planet? And, you know, I had got to that point where I was like, I have a need to know. And so the answer from the inner planes was, there was a pregnant pause, and then they said, if we told you, you wouldn't believe us. I'm like, great, thanks a lot. Okay, what am I supposed to do with that? But anyway, after that asking, it somehow prepared me to start to receive information and downloads about the history, the ancient history of this planet, as it relates to our Annunaki heritage, the Annunaki Syrian lineages, which we've heard about, which got expressed into some Sumerian tablets. And so that's what Mike's going to be talking about shortly, as soon as they're ready here. Have you guys heard of this story? Enki and Enlil and all the fun and games of the royal family and the birth of the secret societies, and we're understanding the tangled web that is all of that, causing a vibrational wedgie for humanity now that is so big we can't even get it out ourselves. How about that? It's like, God, I got something on my butt, but I don't even know what it is, and I don't know how to get it out. Could you please help me? So in other words, the heritage of these beings, our relatives, you know, they intentionally, for their own reasons, at their own time, we're not going to be judgmental now. They just decided to keep us from knowing our true star origins, keep us from knowing our true connection with the one source of all light as expressions of it, saying that we needed intermediaries so that they could keep us, you know, under control, good little humans obeying and whatnot. And so that's been the game. That's been fun and games. Hasn't that been fun? Have you guys enjoyed that process? All right. So, yes, are we ready to forgive everybody? So let's just call upon that divine forgiveness right here and right now. Shall we forgive every single person that ever perpetrated on ourselves or this race to cause it into forgetfulness, to cause it to forget its power. Can we just forgive them all right now? Should we do that? Let's just open ourselves and our hearts and say, we forgive you. Whatever that is, we now dissolve away out of our unconscious any and all resentment, any and all pain, any and all history within ourselves that might keep us in judgment of anyone. Because if we're judging anyone, even those powers that so-called be on the planet, we are going to keep ourselves in what? Negative vibration. But what do we want to do instead? We want to create balance and harmony. And so as beautiful warriors of light on a light mission at this time, we are sanctioned to release and forgive all beings, know that all that is created has come from the one source in its game, in its dance into form, acting as many different beings with free will, taking a ride and a dip into free will. So part of our abilities as light warriors is to forgive everyone and everything and accept all that is as it is, and B, to take that mighty sword of truth and cut through anything that is not feeling in alignment with that divine love that we are, and to choose again and to cut away all those things that we now, through our power as beings of light, as aspects of the Creator, that we can now choose. We can now choose to step fully into our power. And do we have the potential to shift things? Yeah. Who are we again? Star beings. God. Love. Awesomeness. So any part of you that doesn't recognize your total, full, complete awesomeness, are you ready to put that bag down, take that coat off? Can we do that now? Who wants to keep that coat of feeling other than awesome? Feeling other than magnificent? Any of you guys want to keep it? I didn't think so. So shall we just release that and dissolve the Creator? Okay, we're ready to take that coat off. We're ready to get naked in that way. We're ready to be who we really are, to whatever degree we're able to at this time, and knowing that we have that divine mission, that divine purpose in all of this as individuated aspects of the one, here for fun. Here to rock the planet back into whole new refracted synergies of light. Shall we? Yeah, that's what time it is. That's what I'm talking about. Yes. Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I'll give it to her. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, so any part of us that has any of this sense of unworthiness inside of us still, where did that come from? Well, if you think about the history that we're going to learn about a little bit today, and if you read about these ancient myths, it's no wonder that humanity feels a little less than worthy, with the things that the race was imprinted with. And so, in other words, it's not even personal. It's not even personal. So if we again can go into that cauldron of our heart right now and just say, Creator, we're willing to let go of any imprint or patterning that tells us that we're anything less than divine extensions of your love, fully and absolutely worthy of abundance, goodness, benefit, the ability to create, ability to assist. Really, truly, all we have to do is ask, and then the energy will work itself out, because we say it is our word as an extension of the Creator, the Creator's love. Yeah, we can do this thing, It's so crazy, it just might work.
So this is open space, right?
Open space. What does that mean?
You might get the mic.
We're just waiting for these guys to give us the cue that they're ready with their tech. Would you like to share something?
You're basically just filling space.
That's what we do. We create space, actually. We create space. Sure. No worries. Okay, did you have something you wanted to share? Okay. What do you guys want to hear about? What do you want to talk about? You want to talk about this stuff some more? Yeah. What questions do we have about this? Who is struggling with something, some kind of issue around this, understanding your own magnificence? Or
I would like to know if anybody has clarity on what Bashar talks about as the working with the template level, the conscious agreement that we all have on how this place is set up, and how can you push the limits of that? How can we start rewriting that so we can expand that? And if I believe that everything I take into my body, even though it's not of the highest vibration, becomes the highest vibration when I take it in, is that a valid belief?
So you're talking about my favorite subject right now. Well,
people that eat a bunch of junk and are happy about it get like, he always says that, are like thin and good and healthy, and people that are down on themselves are like, oh, I just ate a bunch of junk, are the ones that gain weight and feel bad and whatever.
It's also, well, it's a matter of like, for me, it's like, I used to like, okay, so Carlos Castaneda in the Don Juan books, he used to talk about that Don Juan could eat anything. And so I was like, dude, okay, cool. That means I can eat as many chocolate brownies as I want. I'm just going to transmute that stuff. And then I got really sick. Right, balance. And also, if we can transmute it, but there's a planet that provides food in its natural state that will help us, then why would we even want to? It's much easier to reach for the apple and have that. Right.
She just said it. Bashar said last week too. You get the easier thing. What's easier? You eat a bunch of vegetables. It's easy. You don't have to do anything with them. They're raw. You pick them and you eat them. So that's easy. Why are you gonna go and shop and buy something that's like all processed? That's the hard part.
And then do all the work of transmuting it.
Transmute it. That's explaining everything you just asked.
Right. And then about the template portion, the blueprint portion of reality. It's one of my favorite topics of all. And in other words, like, who are we again? We're extensions of the Creator in form, endowed with all the attributes of the Creator, the power of imagination, the power of feeling, the power of thought. And that thought is a seed which causes vibrations to go out and bring back to us that which we have seeded. And that's operating 24/7, 365, no matter what. It doesn't get turned off. God doesn't get turned off. It's happening whether you are in alignment or not. So as we leverage, as we start to remember that and we start to become aware of what it is we are offering, what it is that the vibration is that we are offering, and start to get upon the horse and take the reins of it and ride it instead of being dragged behind it by allowing our thoughts to go willy-nilly, it's a matter of us becoming more aware of that. And then as we come together in that conscious knowing of what it is we're doing as creators, we're going to be able to blueprint new versions of reality based on agendas of our own choosing to shift the collective consciousness, save our butts at the last possible second with the most fun ever just because we can. Yes. And that is Anchor the Dream. That's what we do at Anchor the Dream. The site is only beginning to be built. It's anchorthedream.com, but you can check back in there. It's a theater process, a reality creation process for doing that blueprinting. We'll be doing it in Sedona in February at the Raw Living Expo. Thank you. All right, so I think we are ready with the tech. This is very exciting. I can't wait for this talk by Mike Schultz. Mike is a researcher and a filmmaker. He's produced 4 films about ancient aliens, and people can find out about these 4 films at mysteryislands.net. And he hosted a radio show for 3 years and interviewed the top experts in the fields of the ancient aliens who had interactions on this planet. And so this is how he actually started learning about this material and subsequently came out with his own presentations about it. He also hosted a TV series for 5 years on the topic of the Annunaki and those naughty relatives of ours who monkeyed around with Homo erectus, so to speak. And anyway, we love you, we forgive you, all beings of light. Yes, we forgive everybody. And the topic today is going to be legends and myths of animal-human hybrids, past and present. So this is fascinating. It's something that I have been wanting to know about myself. So it's with great pleasure that we introduce Mike Schultz. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, thank you. We're going to get started. How's that? No. Okay, so we're going to start in Egypt. Why not, right? And we have an animal-human hybrid right here. The Sphinx is the body of a lion and the head of a human being. So we're going to dig into legends and myths and find out if there's any truth to possible animal-human hybrids or if it's all mythology. We're going to look at the evidence today. And in Egypt, the dynasty of Egypt ran a really long time. You could argue it ran from 3000 BC to 1500 BC. And thanks to the Rosetta Stone, we are able to decipher hieroglyphics. We understand what they say. And what the Egyptians wrote about is that there were human beings on the planet and there was God, but there was another group of demigods, and they had names like Horus and Osiris and Isis, and they had all kinds of kind of special powers. And a lot of people in my field believe they're the Annunaki. And in addition to that, there was another group who were part animal, part human. So there were basically different groups on the planet at that time. And we'll look into them further. And here's another one with the head of a crocodile and the body of a human. This is Sobek. And he was described as a general in Pharaoh's army. And there's a lot of bas reliefs or statues of him around the Nile River. And decorations of him on temples in that area. So that's one example. But we need to also look at ancient tablets for evidence. So this is in Iran. This is an amazing site. And it's called the Beasties tablets, and it's up on a wall or on the side of a mountain. The only thing I could compare it to in the United States would be Mount Rushmore. It's about the size of a football field. And a researcher named Rawlinson in the 1800s had to climb up there on scaffolds, and he took a paper mache of these writings, and he brought them down and tried to decode them. It was like a Rosetta Stone because some of the writings were in Sumerian, cuneiform, and right next to it was Akkadian, which was understood. So that provided the translation. That was the breakthrough as to why we are able to understand Sumerian clay tablets to this day. And so once again, it's in Iran. And it tells the story of a king. His name was Darius, and he was fighting in Persia for control of the empire. That's what this story is about. A little bit closer up. And it says that he had some kind of deity or god who flew around on a winged disc telling him what to do. And his name was Ahura Mazda, and you can see him right up there on top. What is a winged disc? Is it a possible UFO? A lot of researchers in my field believe that's a depiction of a UFO. Another key piece of evidence is in the Library of Nineveh, because there were 30,000 tablets when this was uncovered, neatly arranged, almost like a library, and they were in order and they were filed, and now a lot of them are in the British Museum, but a lot of researchers in my field really refer to the Library of Nineveh and all of the incredible findings of the clay tablets. And this has helped us discover what was happening, and the time frame is about 4000 BC, so before the Egyptian dynasty. And this is in the area of Sumer, Iran, Iraq. And the university that really got involved in all of this around 1900 was the University of Pennsylvania. So if you're in that area, or if you visit Pennsylvania and you want to see clay tablets and find out about research, they were the group that went over to the Middle East around 1900 and were doing a lot of digging and finding all of this evidence. And there's a researcher before Zecharia Sitchin in the 1950s. I really want people to know about him. His name is Samuel Kramer. And this book was, it's in Spanish version, La Historia Empieza en Sumer. That means history begins in Sumer. What he's saying is that art and architecture and math and science and music all kind of appeared in this area of Persia around 4000 BC. Before that, it was just nomadic tribes of people. So where did it come from? Did some outside third party intervene around that time and give us this language and write all these tablets and create these pyramids and do all these things all of a sudden? Now, Kramer put his work under fiction. Okay, that's the difference between him and Zecharia Sitchin. But it was the 1950s, and it's too bad he's not around. We could pick his brain a little bit more. He spent his entire life researching this topic. So he's written some good books, and it's good if you're really going to get into this field to read, of course, Zecharia Sitchin's books, but then go back to the 1950s and read Kramer as well and compare the two. He tells the same stories of Enki and Enlil and the brothers and fighting for minerals. It's the same story. Okay, this is, I wanted to show you guys lapis lazuli. It's a beautiful blue mineral, and it was used extensively in Sumeria in 4000 BC by the Annunaki, and they believed strongly in its powers. And for those of you into crystals and minerals, you may want to work with lapis lazuli. It's supposedly a spiritual stone. It opens up your chakras and your throat and helps you connect with the divine. So we not only have writings, we have pictograms, or sometimes they're called bas-reliefs. And they're showing a lot of times like monsters, like animal-human hybrids, and they're fighting with human beings, and they're interacting with human beings or these demigods. So that's more further evidence that there may have been some different kinds of creatures on the planet at that time, especially before the flood. In the late 1960s, an incredible book came out of Europe, Chariots of the Gods, and his main thesis was that these pyramids and these stone blocks, they were so heavy. They were 60 tons and 70 tons and 80 tons, and they were not near the stone quarries many times. Stonehenge is not located next to a stone quarry. No, no, no. Miles and miles away. So somehow these huge, heavy blocks had to be lifted and carried and put into place. And that was kind of his main thesis. He covers the ancient ruins aspect of it. And it was made into a television show in early 70s. It was shown on NBC in the United States. And there were only 3 networks at the time. So a lot of Americans saw it. And that really kicked off the whole field. And now there's hundreds of researchers. This is Zecharia Sitchin, and he's in southern Mexico here. And he's standing next to these giant Olmec heads, and there's dozens of them, all through these dense forests in Mexico. So it gives you an idea of their height. They're about 8 feet high. And I submit to you that these are not warrior helmets that they're wearing. In Zecharia Sitchin, and just a lot of people in this field submit to you that these are gold mining helmets, and that these were gold miners, and they came from Africa and were digging for precious minerals all throughout Peru and Central America, and that's what this was really all about. So Sitchin wrote 20 books. He died a few years ago, and he's still the leader in the field, the top linguist, writing extensively about the Annunaki, all of these gods, these brothers and sisters, these relatives who came from this other place and came down from the heavens. And boy, there's just a little bit that made it into the Bible in Genesis 6, but he interpreted the clay tablets. Now, the University of Pennsylvania, what they're doing is cataloging all the tablets, and they're linking up with museums all around the world. So you can go on their website, and you can look at them, and it will have translations. Sometimes it's just a fragment. It'll say this person and that person got married. It's just a marriage certificate. That's all it is. Or this person sold a piece of land to that person. Or this person traded some sheep for some cows. Or it'll tell you a story about the Anunnaki and fighting for gold. It depends on the tablet. But that's why a lot of us don't believe these are fairy tales. Why are 80% of them like business transactions and real estate documents and deeds? These don't seem like fairy tales at all. These are pretty down-to-earth tablets and documents of transactions. And so this is Thoth. This is one of these deities or demigods, and he was depicted as some kind of animal-human hybrid. He has the body of a human being, but he has the head of an ibis or a pelican. And there's different theories on this. Some people just believe it's just symbolic. It's just symbolic. And by the way, he's always writing. He's always got a quill, and he was documenting events at the time. Other researchers believe that the Anunnaki wore masks when they were in public, and that this was a mask. Because if you've seen ancient statues of the Anunnaki, they have giant eyes. And apparently it was disturbing to human beings to look directly into their eyes. And so maybe when they were out in public, they wore a mask of an animal. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there as a theory. And then there's a third group that believe, no, this is what he actually looked like. This is an accurate, like a photograph, okay? So this is a clay tablet. They're small, they're like 6 inches by 6 inches, a lot of them, and it's like a triangular wedge shape. It's called cuneiform. It's not related to any ancient language. There's no linguistic similarities to Hebrew or Greek. It's as if it were an off-the-planet language or a third-party language or interference. We don't have any triangular-shaped languages that we're writing today. It's just something different. And about 500,000 of them have been found so far in Persia, and they're in museums all over the world. And this is a depiction, a bas relief of what the Annunaki may have looked like. Large eyes, like I told you, a lot of times they had long beards. Right next to it is some kind of reptilian creature. Okay, every once in a while there's some kind of reptilian human creature going on. All right, not that often, but there's some statues, and he's got wings on his back, and they're walking side by side, and he's holding a pine cone, and my understanding is that represents the third eye and the pineal gland, and that's a sacred image of a pine cone there. So this is a statue of Gilgamesh. There's a really old series of 12 clay tablets, and they tell the story of Gilgamesh. And anyone interested in the field, you got to know this story. Okay, it's one of the oldest stories we have. He was a king. He was part Anunnaki and part human. That was his genetics. So he wasn't totally immortal like the demigods, but he wanted to be. And he went on this long journey to attain immortality, and he went through all sorts of adventures along the way. And it's an interesting document saying that at that time there were Anunnaki, there were human beings, and there were hybrids in between. And he was a giant. He was, 7 feet tall, maybe not as giant as the Anunnaki, but he was taller than most humans. And there's all kinds of ancient statues of creatures with wings on them, and they're found all around the world, and they're depictions of maybe ability to fly. Maybe it's just symbolic, but and the most common one is the Birdman. The Birdman like this you would find all over the world in various types of statues. So this is a really ancient almanac from, if you look into Europe, going back into the 1300s and 1400s, they had all these, they were called bestiaries, all right? That's a new word of the day for you, bestiaries. And it's an ancient encyclopedia. And it depicts creatures, and there was a Roman named Pliny the Elder, and he wrote about, normal, he was cataloging animals 2,000 years ago, like elephants and giraffes. And then in the same dictionary or encyclopedia, he would have these monsters or these beasts that I'm talking about side by side. So his name again is Pliny the Elder, and he did a lot of documenting a couple thousand years ago that these were real beasts. And this is, all back to Egypt a little bit. As they talked about, when you die, you would go on a journey through the underworld, and you would encounter a lot of fearsome creatures like Anubis, and he would rip out your heart if you were not, worthy enough to enter the kingdom of immortality, or he would let you pass by. And that's his scale of justice, and he's weighing the scales of justice right here to find out your worth. So this is a chimera, and this is the body of a lion, but then it has a goat's head coming out of the back, and then it has the tail of a snake. So this is definitely a representation of a beast in our past that was like a hybrid of different kinds of animals. So, there's various legends around the world of the chimera, and a lot of times what it talks about is it would wait on some country road away from the city, and it would attack travelers, or maybe sometimes a lone visitor going from one place to another. And that would be the interaction with humans, would be, killing the human being. That's one example of a legend and mystery. This is the, let me get a little bit more. The harpies were legendary. They were female type of beings. They had the body of a bird and the head and breast of a human female. A lot of them were said to have kind of an evil or hostile mood generally. And they gathered in groups of 20 and 30. According to Greek mythology, King Phineus was overtaken by harpies who attacked his city. And Jason and the Argonauts traveled by ship to drive off the harpies with bows and arrows, chasing them out to sea. Pliny the Elder documents harpies in his natural history book, stating that they were sighted near India by the entourage of Alexander the Great. So they're similar to the ancient Sumerian stories of the Pazuzu and the Birdman, except this time it's a female character. So sirens are similar. They have the head of a woman, but the body of an eagle. There's a lot of folklore of sailors around the globe interacting with them, and they would attack sailors on the ship. But they would sing this beautiful song, and they would try to enchant the sailors out to sea alone where they could attack. And Jason and the Argonauts had to sail through a group of them in Greek mythology. He plugged his ears with wax, and they tied him to the mast because this song was so beautiful. And so he was able to make it through this pack of them. And they were so upset, these sirens, that a lot of them killed themselves, according to the myth. And they're companions to the goddess Persephone in Greek mythology. And they are also listed in medieval bestiaries right alongside other kinds of birds. And there's a 17th century book called Johnston's Birds, which lists them as well, if you want to look that one up. Okay, this is the basilisk, and this is kind of a fearsome creature. There we go. The body and tail of a snake and bird's legs with wings on the chest, and it's a relative of the codal, like Quetzalcoatl from Mexico, the feathered serpent. This is like a cousin or a relative to a codal. And a distant relative is said to be an iguana as well. These deadly creatures paralyze their victims with an intense stare, so if you run into one, you don't want to look them in the eye, okay? They were said, then they would bite their victims and causing fatal convulsions. Pliny the Elder detailed basilisks in his natural history book. And they were also featured in 12th century bestiaries, okay? And really old almanacs from Europe, basically. The snake and bird hybrid symbolized the devil in England, and there were a wave of attacks in the 15th century, which is much more recent. And a brave man, what they did to kill the basilisk is he would don a suit of mirrors, and he would go into this room where the basilisk was, and hopefully it would look into the mirror and die, okay? And the last known attack was 2 young girls were killed in Poland, and they sent a criminal down into a basement with a suit of mirrors to kill the creature. So that was the last known attack. Okay, the Griffon. This is a royal lion with wings on it. It's another kind of hybrid between 2 or 3 different animals. And it's featured a lot on royal crests all throughout Europe. It's a majestic animal. There's a Roman historian named Aelian, and he reported in 200 AD attacks on animals by griffins, humans, ripping them to shreds with eagle-like talons. And he describes the goddess Ishtar is the mistress of the griffins, according to folklore. And what royal kingdoms would do is they would have symbols of them around the treasure to basically protect them. The Greek historian Herodotus writes about a griffin who ruled the seacoast of Russia and fought with men over gold and treasure. And if you read the book Alice in Wonderland, there's a more gentler, kinder version of the griffin. This is a lake in Los Angeles, and there's been a lot of sightings of the griffin. And it's called Lake Elizabeth, and it was in the 1800s. And these were Spanish ranchers who were living all around the lake, and some kind of winged monster that looked like a griffin was attacking their livestock and apparently breathing fire and burning down some of their houses. And I mean, it's hard to believe, but I'm including it because there were so many sightings about this situation, and people who ran away from their home and they left their entire livestock and their farm or their ranch or whatever. And the missionaries called it El Lago de Diablo, the Lake of the Devil. And finally, there was this really tough hombre, this rancher named Miguel Leones, and he shot and killed it, apparently, in 1886. But if you go there today, you know, the people who live around Lake Elizabeth will tell you, you know, some stories about that. This is the behemoth. It's described several times in the Bible. The book of Job tells us of a creature with powerful muscles who lives in a swamp. And it's described as some kind of cross between an elephant and a hippo. And it's also written about in the book of Enoch, which was censored from the Bible because it talks about giants in the book of Enoch. And it's described as a monster, one of the largest beasts of the animal kingdom, a possible type of dinosaur. It also mentions an animal-human beast in Samuel 23. Benaiah is a valiant fighter, and he kills two other fearsome men who are said to have lion-like features. And Samuel also mentions, you know, if you read Samuel 21 in the Bible, a giant with 6 fingers and toes. And the book of Jasher in the Apocrypha mentions manipulation of animals and humans into bizarre creatures, as does the book of Giants or the book of Enoch. And there's statues on Easter Island of some of these demigods, and they do have 6 fingers and 6 toes. And there's some tiki gods in the South Pacific that have 6 fingers and 6 toes. And there's a biblical description of Goliath with 6 fingers and 6 toes. So, you know, it's very possible that that was a difference between them and us. And if you notice today, we have a counting or a math system based on 6, still to this day, like 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. And that's kind of odd. You would think we would be counting by tens all the way, right? That's 10 fingers. But we still have this strange system based on 6, and it could be due to that factor of the giants having 6 fingers. It's a theory. This is Angkor Wat, and this is an amazing place in Cambodia, and there's 72 buildings on the ground which correspond to 72 stars in the constellation of Draco. So I believe it was built by the Annunaki because human beings just didn't do that kind of building where, you know, they would align the buildings with some star system. That's a hallmark of the Annunaki when researchers in my field are looking for who built what. And the Garuda is an animal-human hybrid. It has the head of an eagle and the body of a human. And it's all throughout this temple. It's all throughout statues and symbols on the wall, this Garuda. And the wings of the eagle may represent the god's ability to fly, once again. So you can see the detailed, intricate symbols on the wall here, and it's just beautiful. And they're all throughout India. There's a strong belief in the Nagas. And the Nagas are a powerful reptilian race of gods, and they say they came down from the sky, and they imparted knowledge to mankind. And they're said to live below the temple sites. And there's a widespread belief in Nagas, which are basically the body of a human and the head of a snake, all throughout India in the distant past. It's all throughout that region. And here's a sphinx. And so, you know, there were guardians all over, you know, the Middle East. They were guarding temples. They were guarding treasure. And the pharaoh Amenemhet sent a pair of them to guard the temple of Baal in Syria. So there's research, or I found research of trading them back and forth amongst kings. They were used by royalty as bodyguards and gatekeepers, similar to a griffin. The Old Testament book of Kings describes the Sphinx as guarding the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, and their symbols were used to decorate chariots of the era. Okay. So this one, this is kind of like a lamassu. You know, you see, once again, it could be part lion, part human, part bird with the wings. And in 300 AD, the Roman Emperor Hadrian bought a pair of them to Croatia to watch over the imperial palaces. And this is probably the last historical reference to a lamassu or a sphinx in literature. And this magnificent creature was bred to be the guardians of Assyrian palaces and temples. And about 50 years ago, the Shah of Iran was said to have been attacked by a lamassu. And the documentation of this event is very sketchy, but the Shah of Iran, reported in around 1950 of an attack of an Alamasu. And you know, they're featured all throughout the region, and here's another example of one here. Okay, this is once again like a page out of a bestiary here, and this is the Manticore. Let me make this bigger. And the Manticore you also don't want to run into on a dark, lonely road. He said to have a kind face like Aslan from the Narnia books, but he would kind of draw you in with this wise, kind face, and then he had this poisonous tail with quills on it, and he would kind of whip around that tail, and it would be like a poison dart that he would nail you with and kill you, and then he could eat you. So, are we having fun yet? According to legend, he would trap travelers with his gentle, wise expression on his face. It's called the Manticore, once again. And there's been the only sightings in the past several hundred years are in the mountainous villages of Iran. The locals tell many tales about the elusive Manticore, who may be attacking travelers going from one place to another, once again, usually out on isolated country roads. Okay, let's move to Greece, the Minotaur. So this is, you know, part bull, part human. And there's so many myths, of course, in Greek mythology about animal-human hybrids. And he was so dangerous they built this elaborate maze to keep him in. And he was killed off by the god Theseus. And there are many artists that have created sculptures and paintings of the legendary fight of Theseus and the Minotaur. The strangest aspect to the legend of the Minotaur is that there's a museum owner named Arthur Edwards, and he bought this land in Greece and Crete around 1900. And he uncovered a giant temple with corridors and hallways in the shape of a maze, with a large courtyard in the center. And of course, on the sides would be frescoes of this creature in a fight. So this is an example of archaeology confirming the legends and the myths of actually finding a temple with a maze in it, just like the story of the Minotaur. Okay, let's talk about satyrs and fauns. The ancient god Pan is often depicted as a satyr or a faun. His legs are like a calf, but his upper body is human, except for the face, which appears to be like a goat. With two curly horns in his crown, the satyrs are known for their wild parties and sexual nature, dancing around a glowing fire to the magical sounds of the panpipes. Are we having fun yet? It gets better. The legendary beasts of the forest had a craving for wine, and often their drunken parties would turn violent and angry. So a lot of us know about, you know, the faun in Narnia, you know, Mr. Tumnus is kind of a gentle creature. But even he, if you read the Narnia books, was sent to kidnap a human being. So there's like this dark side as well. And in Greek mythology, the satyrs were the constant companion of Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry. And by the way, this is kind of where the symbol of Satan or the devil came from when the church was kind of working on some kind of image to put forth to be fearsome. The pan or the faun was used as a symbol to create an image of Satan. Okay, centaurs are also party animals. All right, they're known for getting drunk and violent, and they were said to be not that intelligent, actually. You could trick them easily or get them to do things. They were kind of like big, dumb animals. But, you know, in astrology, of course, the Sagittarius is, that character is based on the centaur. And they were, like I said, known for a lot of fighting and violence. They lived in tribes and shared a communal wine jar. According to legend, bands of centaurs were known to terrorize local villages from Greece to southern Russia. They're also said to join Dionysus, you know, and the Romans knew him as Bacchus, the god of revelry and wine. Pliny the Elder describes that he saw one embalmed in honey brought over to Rome from Egypt. They are featured in Roman artwork and murals and frescoes of 2,000 years ago. They were said to retreat into the remote mountains of Asia and have not been seen since. So there's a strong tradition of dwarves, of little people, of belief in dwarves all throughout Europe to this day. And there were different groups. There was one group that was often sad and solitary. There was another group of dwarfs, and this is around Scandinavia, that are said to be friendly and outgoing and interacting with humans more, but they can also be tricky and they can trick human beings. And then there's an aspect of kidnapping humans for their genetics and taking them underground, and this is a constant theme when you're talking about these little people. It just keeps coming up. And then there's another group of dwarves that are said to be hoarding treasure and guarded and jealous of their treasure. And they're said to remain underground during the day, but they will feast and carouse at night above ground in the forests during the spring. They are fine craftsmen in the field of metalsmithing and smelting, and in Viking mythology they created Thor's hammer, Odin's ring, and Freya's necklace. So here's a giant next to some little people, dwarves, and in Scandinavia and the Vikings just had a really strong tradition of believing in these giant gods. It's all throughout their history, and Odin, of course, and it's just part of their culture and their beliefs, and these legends and myths have been passed down to us. So this is back to Greece. This is Hercules, and if you remember, he had 12 tasks, and he had to kill the Hydra. That was one of the second task. And this was kind of a snake, reptilian type of creature with some human qualities as well. And of course, when he would slice off the head, then 2 more would grow. And he eventually, he torched it. He burned the Hydra. That's how he killed it. And the Hydra was said to have lived underneath a lake, and the lake was a gateway to the underworld. And that's another theme, that somehow a lot of these creatures come from the underground and the underworld, and it may lead to some other place. And I just want to remind you that the underneath us, the ground underneath us, is so unexplored. There's caverns and caves that go for miles that have never been explored, so we don't really know. Okay, let's talk about sea monsters. The Leviathan. The Bible mentions a giant sea monster 6 times called the Leviathan, and from the descriptions it appears to resemble a cross between a whale and a sea serpent. The book of Job had an extensive passage describing the fearsome traits that terrorized fishermen out to sea. The Leviathan is mentioned alongside common animals such as sheep and goats in biblical passages. It's also mentioned in the ancient Jewish text, the Talmud, which states the sea monster was created on the 5th day of creation. The Leviathan also appears in the Book of Giants, also known as the Book of Enoch, which was removed from the official canon of the Bible. In these passages, there's a reference to the creature being female, as opposed to the behemoth, which is often referred to as male. And there's no modern sightings of this creature. So the Yeti, this is fascinating. This is in the Himalayas, very high up, above 20,000 feet. In the 15th century, there was a philosopher named Roger Bacon, and he visited there, and he talked about this wild, hairy man of the snows in Tibet. And then in 1882, there was a major in the army, Major Waddell, and he found giant footprints of about 20 feet, 20 inches, giant footprints all across the snow in the Himalayas. And then in 1921, Lieutenant Howard Bury traveled in the same area, and his Sherpa guides pointed out 3 Yeti walking across the snowfield at 23,000 feet. So they had an actual sighting. And he followed them and found a number of giant footprints. And the Sherpas called the creature the Metu Gammi, which translates to the abominable snowman. And that in the 1920s really kicked off the legend in the United States, and there was strong interest in the mystery, and it intensified in the 1950s when Eric Shipton came back to the U.S. with a famous photograph of a 13-inch long footprint of a Yeti. So sightings have been rare, but cryptozoologists have glimpsed a 7-foot-tall monster that weighs an estimated 700 pounds, but they have been unable to produce a clear picture. The Yeti is apparently extremely shy and is a master of its environment. He is white, a lot of times with a white coat, and he can blend into his white, snow-bound environment. So that's a more modern example of some kind of beast or monster. And we're going to talk about today, if there's still any more around today. This is a kraken, and if you look at like Icelandic or journals of fishermen from Greenland from 1200 or 1300, they talk about this kraken. And it's a horrendous monster. You don't want your boat to go near it because it creates like this vortex, and then the boat swirls around and it's sucked up into the mouth of the kraken. But apparently the fishermen in Iceland and Greenland were terrorized by this creature, and it was written about in almanacs. So today, let's talk about the Jersey Devil. There was a really extensive sighting around 1909, and it made the newspapers, and it was a big deal in 1909 because, like, entire people in a town would see this monster, or this animal-human hybrid, which was something like a horse or with bat wings. It's clearly has some human characteristics as well, very intelligent. And there were footprints left all around several towns, not just one town, because it was in the winter and there was snow. And people saw it climbing up on rooftops, and they saw it kind of swooping through the air or walking through town. And, you know, that's something that you can look up in newspapers. And so that's why I'm including it. And there was a naval commander named Stephen Decatur, and he tried to kill one. There were just sightings from the Navy and the Army in the 1800s, and he was shooting at it with a cannonball, and it was hurt, but it flew away. And the brother of Napoleon, Joseph Bonaparte, reported seeing the creature during hunting trips in the early 1800s. So it's been around a while. It apparently has glowing red eyes, and there's this screeching sound it can make. And in the 1950s and 60s, it was reported that there were a lot of killings of farm animals and killing dogs in this New Jersey area. Okay? Chupacabra. So in the 1970s, there was some pretty strange reportings in Puerto Rico blamed on, they called it El Vampiro de Mocha. And they felt that at the time that it was a satanic cult because there would be like 3 bite marks or 3 holes in the neck, and all the blood would be drained of the body of an animal, okay, like a sheep. And this was found all throughout Puerto Rico in the 70s. So initially, people thought it was some kind of creature or a satanic cult. And then during the 1990s, there was a big wave of these Chupacabra killings, and that means goat sucker in Spanish, Chupacabra. And so then there started to be more descriptions of what this actually looked like. Some believe it's a lizard type of being with scaly greenish skin and spines running down its back. It stands up on 2 feet, is about 4 feet high, and is able to hop like a kangaroo. This frightening creature is described as having sharp fangs and a dog-like face. It makes a loud screeching sound, and it may have the strong smell of sulfur around it. Now, sulfur would indicate possibly spending a lot of time underground, so just bear that in mind. And the red eyes as well, glowing red eyes on the Chupacabra. And a lot of these sightings are by, you know, real down-to-earth people and farmers, and it's not like these are like New Age people citing these a lot of times. It's policemen come forward, and like with the Mothman. I mean, that was like people from the city council and policemen who stand serious jeopardy of losing their jobs. And I've lost a few jobs, by the way, along the way. So it's not fun coming forward and being public with this stuff. So in the late 1960s, what happened was there was this creature with glowing red eyes, and it had the huge wings, the Mothman, in West Virginia. And for about 13 months, it pretty much terrorized people. And it would fly along cars, and there would be sightings above a bridge. And what happened is it was called the Silver Bridge. And in December of '67, the entire bridge collapsed, and 46 people died. So, and that then a lot of the sightings went away from that point on. So a lot of people feel this was some kind of omen or some kind of messenger trying to warn of some tragedy. And of course, it's been pretty well documented, but It's an interesting example of an animal-human hybrid that's a recent sighting and not something from thousands of years ago. This is the Flores Island Hobbit. Let's go to the South Pacific now. And this was an actual different species with a different kind of a brain. Scientists have found skeletal remains of 7 small humanoid beings which stood about 3 feet tall. They do not believe these to be dwarves, but an actual separate species that existed 12,000 years ago. Now, they were sighted on Flores Island as recently as 300 years ago, and the local people who lived there were having trouble because they were kidnapping human babies and taking them off the island. So the local tribes ended up killing off a lot of these hobbits, they called them, or the Flores Island Hobbit, and that was the last sightings of them about 300 years ago. And that's in the region around Borneo, with the Komodo dragon in Borneo, in that part of the world. Okay, Texas Sasquatch. I want to, talk about something different, not the usual Oregon, Washington version of a Bigfoot, but I want to talk about an incident in Texas. It's not that well known. Just so you know, there's millions of acres of dense forest and land and places to hide in eastern Texas, believe it or not. And in 1969, there were a lot of sightings of a 7-foot-tall, hairy ape-like creature that weighed about 300 pounds. And it was in the area of Lake Worth, Texas, and there were a lot of people camping around the lake in the summer of 1969. And they reported this creature would grab inside of tents or grab inside of windows, and you can look it up in newspapers in Lake Worth, Texas in 1969. The whole thing was overshadowed by the moon landing of July 69. So it was quickly forgotten because of the whole moon landing. But it's an important chapter in our history. It's something that I dug up that is important in my research. Let's go to New York. This is Lake Champlain, and there's some kind of sea monster called Champ. That's what they call him up there. There's all kinds of gift shops, Champ. You can buy little dolls. And it's like a Loch Ness Monster type of creature. But there's a good photo of it. A pretty clear photo. And in 1977, there was a woman named Sandra Massey, and she was relaxing on the shore of the lake, and her 2 kids were in the water, and this appears. Okay, can you imagine? This monster was close to her kids in the water. So she ran into the lake, and she grabbed her kids out of the water. Then she ran to her car. She had an old Polaroid camera. She took 1 shot of this monster, and she just kept it in her scrapbook for years. And then finally, she was persuaded to turn this over to some researchers, and that's the story of the one clear picture. But there's been sightings going back to the 1800s. There was a town sheriff reported a close sighting of a creature 30 feet in length near the shore, and he described the creature as having a long neck similar to a horse. And there's been many, many sightings over the years, like I said, by regular folks and townspeople who are not really interested in this kind of material at all. It's a very deep lake, by the way, and it may actually funnel out to the ocean like Loch Ness in Scotland. Okay, leprechauns. So leprechauns, there's a strong tradition of actually believing in them, I found out, in Ireland. And the main point I want to mention is, if you have an interest in this culture, maybe you're Irish or something, there's a really old book called The Book of Conquests, and you can look into that and read that book and find out about the strong tradition of believing in little people and that they're actually real and that they interact with humans and they're this other species. And let's talk about Beowulf. There's a really old story. It's 1,000 years old, and it's from England. It's called Beowulf, and basically there was a king in Northern Europe, and he was enjoying singing and dancing and fellowshipping with his wife in their castle, and all was good. And some kind of Sasquatch or monster or beast attacked the kingdom, and his name was Grendel. And it's another example of a Sasquatch. And so the king needed to find a hero who would kill it, and that was Beowulf, was this warrior, this brave man who came and killed off Grendel. And then he became venerated for 50 years. He was very celebrated, Beowulf. And then toward the end of his life, which is this depiction, he slays a dragon. And then he's killed by the dragon, by the way. That's the end of the story. So I know I don't always have like happy endings, all right? I just follow the research wherever it goes. So what the point I want to make is, in my second film, I really get into dragon mythology of Europe, and all my stuff is on mysteryislands.net, by the way. And they really had all these old almanacs, and they would talk about dragons who would breathe fire and who would live in caves and would guard treasure. And they would come down from time to time from their mountaintops and interact with humans. And a lot of times it didn't end well either. Okay, it wasn't good. I mean, yeah, there's stories of friendly dragons and that sort of thing. But a lot of times they were, killing humans or burning down villages or whatever. And it's so extensive, this belief in dragons, and it makes its way into the King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, that I believe it's based on some kind of real creature. And so, let me see here. These are, we talked a little bit about India and the Nagas, and this is the Birdman once again, and it's all throughout temples in China as well, and Egypt, and this ancient being or deity that was part bird and part human, and that's just another example. So Gilgamesh, I want to tell you a little bit more. There's a beast, a Sasquatch, right next to him. And what happened was he was a ruling king in his region in the Middle East. And according to the tablets, the Annunaki created a beast. They fashioned out of like mud and saliva, it says, a beast. And he came forward to attack. His name was Enkidu. And he came forward to attack Gilgamesh. And they had a big fight. But they ended up becoming friends and partners, so now they're pictured side by side here. And they went off on the adventure I told you about, the journey for the Fountain of Youth. So what happened was they went to some area where there's a cedar forest. And there's only one place, and that's Lebanon, where there's a cedar forest, where cedar trees grow. So we think we know where it is. And there was some giant monster guarding a special area, a giant structure. And Enkidu had a big fight with this monster, and he died. He was killed. But Gilgamesh was able to make it through. And there is a place here, it's called Baalbek, in the cedar forest, where there is an ancient platform and where there are ancient stone ruins, just like the legendary story says. So we have the stone ruins corresponding to an ancient story here. And this one, you can see a person standing there to give you an idea how big it is, but it's about 1,000 tons. Now, a ton is 2,000 pounds, so do the math. It's really heavy. And a lot of times they were never finished moving into place, just so you know. They were kind of left along the way, or projects weren't completed sometimes. But in the far left, you can see a Greek temple or a Roman temple there, and what happened is the Greeks and the Romans came along and they saw a giant platform on the ground. And they said, well, we're going to build on this. The platform's already here. So the Greeks and Romans didn't build the platform. But apparently my understanding from reading the clay tablets, Zechariah Sitchin, was the Anunnaki needed a giant platform to launch the rocket ships, the craft, up into the air. So that was the Baalbek, the cedar forest, their base of operations. So this is the bull of heaven. It's, I believe it's a type of Lamassu that we talked about earlier. And it's attacking Gilgamesh. And the bottom line is, this is where Ishtar comes into the story. She's the goddess of love. She's seducing a lot of kings, if you read about her in ancient texts. And she tries to seduce Gilgamesh. But he doesn't trust her. She's the granddaughter of Enlil, who's one of the main Anunnaki, and he was mean toward humans. Okay, he was the brother who was mean, and he thought human beings should be slaves, and we should be building pyramids, and we were just there for the folly of the gods, or to be workers for the gods. And he wanted to kill us all in the flood. Just so you know, that was fine with him. Wipe us all out. So she was the granddaughter of Enlil, so he didn't trust her. And because he was part human, remember, maybe that had something to do with it. And he rejected her advances, and she sent this Lamassu, this monster, to try to kill him. So that's in the story of Gilgamesh, and he won. Okay, he killed the Lamassu. And so that one has a happy ending. This is in California. This is the Rosicrucian Museum, and it's in San Jose. And I want to direct your attention to right in the middle there, because there's a animal-human hybrid. It's part hippopotamus, part human being, and its name is Tarawat. And it was the female goddess of fertility and childbirth. So it's just another example. If you look at their gardens all around the Rosicrucian Museum, there's all kinds of animal-human hybrids and statues. And it's just one more example of these types of beings in our long-lost, distant past. So there's some ancient tablets I want to talk about. This is called the Atrahasis, and it has to do with the flood. This talks about how the entire earth was wiped out in the flood. And it was an important document because it kind of related to the Bible and what the Bible tells us about the flood in the Old Testament. So that was an important discovery. And this is the Dead Sea Scrolls where they were found. This is the cave in Israel. And these are what the scrolls looked like. And a lot of these ancient documents, what the Dead Sea Scrolls really told us was they were pretty accurate writings that corresponded to the Old Testament of the Bible. So indicating the Old Testament really hadn't changed much in 2,000 years. These corresponded well with the Old Testament. So in my research, I'm trying to blend the Bible with all of this new information, with the Sumerian clay tablets, and find out the ultimate truth of our human history on this planet. And I love this picture. It's Easter Island, a stone statue, because a lot of times you think, well, they're not that big, it's just 10 feet above the ground, but they're not. They're really huge. Some of them are like 35 feet, and there were never a lot of people that lived on Easter Island. That's kind of the key point. It was just some villages, and no real history of tools that would make these giant statues, and about 900 of them were made, and they were only made in one part of the island where there's a volcano, and they had to be carved out of the side of a volcano and lifted up, and lifted out of a steep volcano and then moved to the other side of the island. So it was a big deal. And they were all facing outward toward the sea, and many researchers in my field believe that this was a big project of the Annunaki. And once again, like I mentioned, a lot of them were never finished. It was definitely an incomplete project. So my personal belief is the Anunnaki would just move from one place to another and follow the gold. And they had no problem with just stopping projects in the middle, and because what they really wanted was the minerals. That's what it was about. It was not about creating, statues that would last or anything like that. And so this is a little bonus information. Anyone ever heard of the Georgia Guidestones? I'm including it because this monument includes the Sumerian clay tablet language in America. And like I said, nobody uses that language anymore. Nobody knows it's not related to any of our languages. But it's in Georgia, and in 1979 or 80, there was a businessman who said, I want some giant tablets built on a hillside in Georgia. And it was all a little bit mysterious, but he did it, and he put 7 languages or 8 languages, and one of them was the cuneiform, the Sumerian language. And it's aligned to a star system. The solstice, the winter solstice. If you see that little slat in the stone, and on December 21st of each year, the shortest day of the year, the sun lines up exactly with that hole. And so the writing and the language talks about creating a one-world government, actually. And it talks about depopulating down to 500 million people. So, it could be some new world order kind of thing, and you can explore that on your own. So that's called the Georgia Guidestones, once again. This is a pretty recent finding, and it's called Göbekli Tepe. And how many of you saw National Geographic with this on the cover? Okay, it made the cover of National Geographic. And it's very extensive tablets have been found, and it's in Turkey. And researchers are dating this back to 9,000 BC, so it's really, really old. We don't have a lot, like I mentioned, after or before 4,000 BC. We have Jericho, that's a really old city. That dates back to like 7,500 BC, okay. After Jericho, not much. We have human beings were nomadic, just looking for food, scavenging. But all of a sudden, there's these extensive tablets in Turkey and Göbekli Tepe, and they depict all kinds of animals. Some are not animals that are around anymore, like woolly mammoths or things like that, that are just animals that are extinct. And this site is being excavated, and it's a giant site. It's almost like a Stonehenge. I would compare it to that, but not as big, not as heavy stones. So I don't think humans built it because, like I said, they were more nomadic at that time. I think this is an Annunaki settlement around 9,000 BC. And just so you know, there's different ways of dating stone. There's like moss or lichen that grows on stone, and it grows really slowly. So just like an eighth of an inch of moss could take 10,000 years. So there is ways to look at stone, and I'm not saying it's accurate or it's perfect, but you can measure the lichen growth on stones and get some kind of ballpark. If you can find tools at a site that are organic, like a deer antler that's been shaped into a tool, and a sheep's horn that's been shaped into a tool, if you can find enough of them, that can be organic, that can be carbon dated, and if it's all coming up 9,000 BC, then that's another indicator that that may be the age of the site. So those are some of the ways that people date some of these ancient sites. And then going back before 9,000 BC, all I can tell you, most researchers in my field put the flood at 11,000 BC. If you know anything about the precession, and we're coming up to 2012, that's exactly a halfway point in the precession. That was exactly 13,000 years ago. And my understanding is the poles shifted, Atlantis sunk, and it was like a new cycle. And we're coming to the end of that 13,000-year cycle right now. But that's a theory, okay? This is a bigger picture of Göbekli Tepe, and you can see the excavation has just begun. Digging and finding these tablets all throughout the region, and that's one we're just going to have to watch as it unfolds, and we find more and more coming out of Turkey. And more is coming out of Eastern Europe. Just so you guys know, there's pyramids that have been found in Bosnia, and for a long time people thought, well, they're just mountains. But upon closer research, there's, stones that are put together and it's artificial. So the Bosnian pyramid is another recent discovery that's very exciting. So, just these are the hieroglyphics. I just wanted to show you a bit of how they look like. And hieroglyphics are not in the main pyramids. They're not in the 3 main pyramids of Giza. They're in a lot of the smaller ones. But there's no writing at all in the 3 main pyramids of Giza. And this is Ishtar. We talked about her, the goddess of love. And she is, the great female goddess of Sumeria. And my understanding from reading the clay tablets is she was given the land to the east. And she journeyed with her entourage to India. And that's why India has an extensive tradition of female goddesses, because there was a big fight over land and minerals. It was just like us. The Annunaki, Enlil and Enki were fighting. Enki ended up with South Africa, that whole region, Zimbabwe, and there's a lot of ancient ruins in Zimbabwe, and Michael Tellinger talks about that. But and then Enlil was given the land around Persia. We talked about the cedar forest, that big platform. That was his region, and Ishtar was given the land to the east in India. This is an amazing document. It's called the King's List. I mean, if you remember nothing else I say, please remember the King's List. It's this big block. It talks about, it's just a list of kings, of rulers in the Middle East, and it goes back 400,000 years. Researchers who are traditional have no problem with the bottom of the list because it talks about kings ruling for 20 years or 30 years. And they can correspond to other documents, like Gilgamesh is on the list. There's other documents that correspond. Yes, that was a king. We agree. This was a real historical king. Traditional researchers have a harder time as you move up the list, because then it talks about kings ruling for 1,000 years, 1,500 years. That's not normal. And then at a certain point, on the king's list, there's a line that says, and then there was a great flood. So there's 10, the top 10 kings are before the flood. And these are the Annunaki, and they are ruling for 10,000 years or more. I know. So just to give you an example, they counted in terms of a shar. A shar is 3,600 years. And, well, we're winding down anyway, so if you can fix it, that'd be great. But if you can't...
This doesn't have any power.
Okay.
How old did you say the king's list went back? How far?
It goes back 400,000 years. So, I mean, your traditional researcher in my field believes the Anunnaki have been on this planet 432,000 years. And a lot of it is based on this king's list. And like I said, they counted in terms of 3,600 years. And they called that a shar. And they believe that, this planet rotated every 3,600 years. So it's an amazing document, and it confirms that there may have been a different group on this planet, and then eventually they transitioned from Anunnaki beings down through the years. You can see where it becomes, they turned it over to human beings. Okay? So I'm going to wrap it up with that. Have I been an hour? I've been going an hour, right? Thank you. I appreciate you attending my lecture. I'm in the back in the booth here, and my movies are available. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Any questions for Mike?
Try and catch him out. Great presentation, thank you. Just wanted to know, did you really touch on genetic engineering? Or if, I don't know if you want to talk about, I don't know if you mentioned it. Yeah.
Do you remember about the fifth picture I showed you, the tablet? Remember that small tablet? I mean, if you read them, what it talks about is there was the Anunnaki spent a lot of time and energy extensively genetically engineering animals and humans, and animals, and testing the situation. And they found a primitive man on the planet at that time, and they felt that this primitive man was a good candidate to be a worker. And they spliced their genes, their Anunnaki genes, with this man and created this Adam and Eve. So yeah, the tablets go into extensive detail on that. And my understanding was this was perfected about 200,000 years ago. And from that point on, they were developed to go right into gold mining, really, because gold mining was so hard, was so difficult. And so it's just a whole alternative way of looking at this planet. Now, the good news is, Enki, which was the good brother, they had a big fight, Enki and Enlil. And Enlil says, I don't want you to give them all of our genetics. I don't want them to have a soul. I don't want you to animate them completely. And Enki said, no, we're going to give them our genetics. We're going to animate them. We're going to make them complete. And he said, one day, don't do it. One day, the humans are going to take over this planet. And that's what we did. We're 7 billion strong. But they left. They got the minerals they needed. I mean, this is all theory. This is all the ancient alien theory, everything I'm telling you. But see, I've angered them. Sorry. I take it back now. This is all theory, but more and more evidence is coming forward, hard evidence to document this story.
So I read something somewhere in my research, because I've been researching this stuff too on my own just a little bit, because it's fascinating. And obviously we have a right to know and a need to know at this point in time, just to sort of piece together what's been happening with us and why some of the mysterious things that are going on behind the scenes have been going on. And one of the things that I read somewhere was that the symbols of, for example, like the lion bird being was and the unicorn too, that the unicorn was a symbol of Lyra, and the unicorn being the symbol of the masculine energy seeding, say the races that were symbolized by the lion or the winged lion. Have you heard anything about that?
I left the unicorn out of my research because I didn't find enough to include it. And this, believe me, there's a lot of stuff we don't include. We just can't find enough evidence. Everything I presented here, there was pretty much an ancient writing about it. It was in some ancient encyclopedia or something. And I included those in my research. Or there was like some really big newspaper article like the Jersey Devil. It was extensively reported. And the unicorn, although it's a fascinating topic, I didn't have enough to include it. And one thing, my website's mysteryislands.net, and my business card is right back at that table.
And you have a couple of films.
I have 4 movies, yeah. And the Sands of Time is the whole history of the Annunaki. If you want to get a group of people together and just understand the basic story, I would get the Sands of Time. And my films are all pictures. It's not about me. It's about the pictures. I'm just the narrator. The Temples of Stone is about a lot in the East. A lot of the ancient ruins like Yonaguni. I mean, oh my God. It's a giant underwater ruin in Japan. And Angkor Wat, amazing ruins. Mystery Islands, my third one, is about an incredible island in Canada with treasure that ties into all of this. And an island in the South Pacific that has a giant stone ruin on it. And the fourth movie is all about South Africa. And all eyes are on South Africa right now, and Michael Tellinger is the guy, the researcher, he was on Skype here last week, who is from South Africa, and he's finding all of these ancient stone ruins about the Anunnaki.
What's the name of that movie?
Well, my movie is Ancient Gold Mines. Thank you.
Awesome. Wow, this is just such a huge topic. So let's definitely explore more and keep studying and maybe watch some of these movies. Thank you so much for sharing and bringing these things forward. Mike Schultz. So, Neil, what's up next, buddy? We have Brad Johnson coming on at what time? 15 minutes. So let's take a quick break, and we'll come back and speak with our next guest. Yes, I believe he's Skyping in. Is that correct? Brad is going to be Skyping in 15 minutes. Something happened. I'm not sure what. Is this the right? Tense. Maybe we can move this podium up here.
Yeah, let me try to check his internet out first. You know what Ilya's at?
Did we get that done?
Okay, I'm gonna try to hook up on Skype.
This can be scooted. I saw them scooting it yesterday.
Let's do it.
Yo, can you come to the podium? What's your password?